Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are diving into a document that raises a disturbing question. If an occupying power displaces a territory's original authorities and establishes its own population, does that new population eventually earn the right to self-determination? Or does the original claim to territorial integrity remain indefinitely valid? Welcome to a new Strategic Labs deep dive. Check the links in the description. So the core of our discussion today is the sovereignty dispute between Argentina and the United Kingdom over the Malvina Islands.
Right, and it's a deeply complex one.
Yeah.
I'll be arguing from the United Kingdom's perspective. Basically, that the democratic self-determination of the current inhabitants, along with continuous British administration, establishes legitimate sovereignty. And I'll be taking the Argentine perspective. I'll be arguing that this is fundamentally an unresolved case of decolonization. Because the population was, implanted by an occupying force. Classical self-determination just can't be invoked here.
Right.
So, territorial integrity has to remain the prevailing legal standard.
Let's get right into the mechanics of the UK position then. We aren't dealing with an abstract legal theory here, right? We are talking about a consolidated political reality.
A reality that started in 1833, though.
Exactly. Since 1833, the UK has maintained continuous administration of these islands. That's nearly 2 centuries of bespoke institutions, a local economy, and, generations of families.
Yeah.
The core legal argument is that self-determination isn't a conditional right. It applies universally to cohesive populations. If the people living there overwhelmingly vote to remain British, international law must protect that democratic will.
But applying self-determination here, it fundamentally misunderstands what that legal mechanism was designed to do. Think about classical self-determination in the 20th century.
You mean the post-World War II era?
Right, exactly. It emerged as a tool for colonized indigenous populations to basically kick out an empire. What Argentina's legal framework points out is the paradox of using an anti-colonial law to protect the colonizers themselves. You cannot violently interrupt a sovereign state's exercise of control, as happened to the Argentina authorities in 1833, implant your own citizens, and then weaponize those citizens' votes to legitimize the occupation.
Okay, let me pause you right there because I want to use a domestic law analogy to see if I'm understanding your boundary here. In domestic property law, we have the concept of adverse possession.
Right, squatters' rights.
Exactly. If a squatter lives in an abandoned house long enough and maintains it, eventually they get the deed. The UK is essentially arguing for geopolitical adverse possession. At what point does a 200-year-old settlement stop being an implanted population and start being a native one, especially considering there was, no indigenous population on the islands before European settlement?
Well, the adverse possession analogy actually works perfectly to explain the Argentine position, but with a crucial correction.
Which is?
You can't steal a house at gunpoint, move your family in, and then claim squatters' rights against the legal owner who has been protesting the theft every single year.
Oh, so the protests stop the clock.
Exactly. The continuous diplomatic protest by Argentina breaks the adverse possession clock. In international law, sovereignty requires both effective control and the absence of a competing legal claim. Argentina has never relinquished its claim.
Right, I see.
The origin of the population is really the linchpin. If international law allows an occupying power to manufacture self-determination simply through demographic engineering and weighting, then the concept of territorial integrity is entirely meaningless.
That's a fascinating way to frame the legal paradox. But let's look at how the global governing bodies actually handle this. Because it seems to me there's a massive disconnect between Argentina's theoretical legal argument and the operational reality on the ground.
How so?
Well, the international community, through daily trade, maritime operations, and diplomacy, they engage with the islands under British administration. It is overwhelmingly accepted de facto.
Accepted de facto by some, sure, but legally rejected by the highest international bodies. This is where we hit a massive anomaly in UN doctrine that most people miss.
You're talking about the UN resolutions?
Right. Usually, when the United Nations looks at a non-self-governing territory, the default solution is a referendum. Just let the people decide.
Which the UK did hold.
Yes, but in this specific case, the UN treats it entirely differently. Resolution 2065 explicitly defines it as a bilateral dispute to be resolved exclusively between 2 states, Argentina and the UK. The UN deliberately bypassed the current population's wishes.
Wait, that's actually a crucial distinction. Are you saying the United Nations actively suspended its normal self-determination playbook here?
Exactly. It's one of the rare exceptions in international law. The UN recognized that the principle of territorial integrity, restoring the land to the state it was severed from, takes precedence when the population isn't native but was placed there by the occupying power.
I see.
Furthermore, Argentina has robust, active diplomatic backing across Latin America and from regional organisms. So this isn't a closed case of legitimate administration. It is legally categorized as an active structural controversy.
Okay, but legal frameworks and UN resolutions inevitably hit a wall when diplomacy fails and force is used, which brings us to the 1982 war.
Right, the conflict.
Argentina bypassed this bilateral diplomatic framework entirely and launched a military invasion. How did that change the legal calculus? From the UK's perspective, and frankly much of the observing world at the time, the British military response shifted the narrative.
In what way?
Well, it was no longer just about 19th century ledgers. It became an immediate moral and practical necessity to protect a peaceful population from armed occupation.
Framing 1982 merely as a rescue mission for the islanders completely obscures the actual mechanics of modern geopolitics, though.
You don't think it was about protecting the inhabitants?
Did the war happen? Yes. Did it legally invalidate Argentina's historical claim to territorial integrity? No. I mean, international law doesn't erase sovereignty claims just because a conflict occurred.
Well, sure, but it changed the dynamic on the ground.
What 1982 really solidified wasn't just the protection of the inhabitants, but the UK's commitment to projecting strategic military power in the South Atlantic. We have to look at what's actually in those waters.
Ah, you mean the resource control aspect, establishing an exclusive economic zone.
Precisely. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea grants 200 nautical miles of economic control around sovereign territory. By maintaining this extra-regional presence, the UK secures highly lucrative fishing rights.
And potential hydrocarbon reserves, right?
Right, and it maintains a geopolitical foothold near Antarctica. The narrative of protecting democratic rights is an incredibly effective legal shield for maintaining a strategic maritime stronghold thousands of miles from London.
So you're saying the people are a pretext?
The population is the legal justification, but the resources and geography are the strategic prize.
Well, I think it's reductive to call a living, breathing community of generations a mere legal shield, even if there are strategic benefits, which obviously there are, for any maritime territory. It doesn't negate the fact that a functioning society exists there today.
I hear that, but the origins still dictate the legality.
To summarize my position, the foundational principle here has to be the human rights of the current inhabitants. The legal fiction of territorial integrity from 1833 cannot override the democratic will of a community that has administered itself for nearly 2 centuries.
Right. Geopolitics aside, you just cannot force a population to submit to a sovereign they fundamentally reject.
And to summarize the opposing framework, you cannot use the democratic will of an implanted population to retroactively legalize a territorial seizure. The islands remain occupied territory.
Understood.
Until the structural violation of territorial integrity is addressed through formal bilateral negotiation, the demographic reality is just the ongoing result of a 19th century imperial act.
The tension here is incredibly profound. We are left looking at a deep, unresolved contradiction in international law.
Yeah, it really is. It forces us to ask whether the passage of time can launder an occupation.
Exactly. And how the definition of colonialism completely inverts, depending on whether you prioritize the rights of living people or the historical rights of a dispossessed state.
We've reached the end of this analysis. If this added value, please like and subscribe to Strategic Labs. See you next time.